Welcome, welcome, welcome to Week Old Beans episode 39. I am one of your hosts, Ardot, and I have with me here, introduce yourself.
I am Fowler, the other host, the greater host.
Alright, calm the fuck down. Calm down. Um, we have a couple topics we're going to go over today, both of which are relevant, because, we wouldn't talk about irrelevant shit on this podcast. But um, the first thing we're going to be talking about is the stunning development that the progressives of the Democratic Party are actually going to get their shit together and fight back against being systemically picked off one by one like a fucking Hunger Games movie. And the
They
second
are
thing,
they are roughly let's see, they are roughly 5 months too late. They should have done this 5 months ago. But on this podcast we often describe them as being fucking useless. But I will say they are now they are being somewhat useful. Granted, it's their own self survival that is motivating this, but we will discuss whether we think it is too late. But maybe Ardot, you want to kind of go into the summary.
as we all know, there's been things escalated quickly on October 7th last year. A lot of wild shit occurred. And ever since then, it seems like American politics has been in a slow nosedive, particularly the Democratic Party. They're pointing the fucking the tip of that airplane straight towards the ground, and they're just fucking going hard. Um, and so the most vocal opponents of Israel in APAC, which is a lobbying group that is basically exists to further the interest of Israel and nothing else. You know, they have been working overtime to make sure that any sort of criticism against Netanyahu and his administration or towards the state of Israel is not permitted within the Democratic Party. Um, so they've been essentially attempting to primary many of the progressives. I know Jamal Bowman. I know that AOC she's going to have a challenger. Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan
I
Omar,
think it's all of them at this
yeah, pretty much
point. The
every
only
single one.
person who I think is not being maybe primaried is I think Presley is safe.
Yeah. And I think they managed to successfully primary oh God, I forgot his name. You might know Fowler.
The Jewish progressive leader.
Yes, they primaried him. He lost. And apparently that has sent shockwaves through Washington because he was apparently, um,
Well, we should go into Levitz was a progressive certainly, but he was definitely on the more conservative end. And he was a Zionist. Like he was against a lot of the Netanyahu government overreach. But unlike Cori Bush or like Rashida Tlaib, Levitz is um, Levitz is fairly moderate, especially on foreign policy. And um, politically murdering him, I think they spent, what was it? You'd remember because you just watched the video. Was it like $15 million?
yeah,
Like
it was
taking
millions.
taking
It was a lot of money.
taking taking out a guy who is firmly pro-Israel and a Zionist was kind of an insane fucking maneuver.
Yeah, I think all in all they've spent 200 million in the election cycles that have been going on since October 7th. Um,
Hmm.
money that they've gotten from the billionaire class. For example, I think Bernie Mac of Home Depot has donated like 2 million to the various APAC funded administrations. But so taking him out, it goes to show, and I think the message that this has sent across Washington is that it's not enough to just be a Zionist. I think beforehand, APAC had been a little
And,
more.
and I think even more tellingly, Levitz is Jewish, so they primaried a fucking Zionist Jew. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like that's you know.
yeah, and what does that say to the Democrats that are not Zionist or not Jewish? Maybe they've kept their mouth shut about Israel. Maybe they've not offered as scathing of a critique. It really proves like it's not enough to be a Zionist. It's not enough to be. You cannot offer any sort of, and I think it's relevant to say this because I think this is problematic. Israel is a foreign government. I mean, let's just be clear. Israel is not representative of the Jewish people. Israel is an administrative state. Netanyahu is one man. Um, you
with
know,
a 15% approval
yeah, with
rating
a
in
15%.
Israel, let alone what he's viewed as in America,
Yeah, like,
in Jewish
and
Americans.
there's a lot of, I know, before October 7th, there were a lot of concerns with Netanyahu's government slipping into anti-democratic territory. This was before October 7th. I mean, his approval rating, even before October 7th, was not the best because his government has become increasingly more authoritarian in a lot of different ways. Um, so, uh, like, like, it, you know, Jan Kuger pointed this out on one of the more recent uh, TYT episodes that I've happened to take a look at before this episode, before we started filming, and he pointed out, and I agree with him, that, imagine if this were a organization that was trying to further the interest of China or Iran or, Saudi Arabia or, fucking Mexico. They're,
People literally, Paul Manafort is in fucking jail for, I think, trying to do that with the Ukrainian government. He was trying to push American policy for the Ukrainians, and he's in prison for like fucking 20 years. Like, you're not allowed to do that normally.
yeah, but
That's
APAC can do it.
yeah.
Like unless you're Israel. Like, I mean, I'm and I think the problem, and I do think this, like, it's a circular conversation. They weaponize anti-Semitism to avoid critique. So if you critique APAC and imply that, you know, APAC is working on the behest of a foreign government and that shouldn't happen, you're accused of being anti-Semitic. Even though
Mm.
obviously APAC does not represent Jewish people, Israel does not represent Jewish people, quote unquote. Um, there is a there, if you were to ask Jewish Americans what they believe about what they think about Israel, you're going to find a plethora of different opinions. It's not a monolithic, one size fits all, approach. And then, like I said, Netanyahu is one person. If you go to Israel and you ask people about Netanyahu, you're going to get a plethora of different answers too. Um,
I think that's an important point that needs to be made very carefully, like in this time of rising anti-Semitism. That
yeah,
like the Jewish people obviously are not a monolith. A lot of Jews are progressive, especially American Jews. And even Arda and I are not Zionists. You can be a Zionist and believe in a Jewish homeland and not before the war.
yeah,
So it is a very complicated
yeah.
situation.
The
And
um
I will
the
say,
the congressman that just got fucking yeeted by APAC was one of those people. He believed. I mean, he said it. He believed that he was a Zionist. He believed in a Jewish state, but he also believed that, like, the safety of the Jewish state was dependent upon the security and safety and prosperity of the Palestinian people, which is the
yeah, and
correct opinion.
and I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter as much in Israel, which is why the Israel lobby is doing this. But like, I don't know if we covered it on the podcast. They were doing polling, and it's like 20%, I think, of American millennials said that like the Holocaust was either not true or greatly exaggerated. And you have all these key figures, Richard Spencer, Nick Fuentes, and then like within the Trump administration, like kind of some of those white nationalists who are Holocaust deniers. It's kind of an insane thing to be using that anti-Semitic critique in such a broad way when we are actually seeing a rise of anti-Semitism, and we are seeing a rise of Jewish hate crimes, and we are seeing a rise of people attacking synagogues, and there are real forces with real political power in this country who are actually anti-Semitic and whose policies, their stated policies, are to discriminate against Jewish Americans.
Yeah, so it's just dumb brain move on behalf of APAC, and I think they flew too close to the sun, and now there's been more of a push from within the Democratic Party, not from progressives, but even from just regular Democrats, and even the Biden administration, with kind of putting their hands up and saying, all right, this has gone way too far. You know what I mean? Like, they've become too partisan with their politics. You know what I mean? They're not playing um, softball, they're playing hardball, and it's becoming more blatant in ways that I think are going to damage. It's like the NRA. I think progressives that are, and we'll get to this in just a second, the progressives that are getting together, the statement that they put out implied that they wanted to treat APAC like the NRA, and I think that's a good comparison because the NRA did this too. The NRA used to be, or at the very least, used to have the illusion of being kind of a bipartisan, um, a bipartisan organization that was focused on, just protecting the right to bear arms and protecting citizens' rights to bear arms. But over the course of 15 years, they became very partisan. It's the NRA is viewed now as a strictly Republican organization. We don't view the NRA. There are other guns rights groups that are less partisan and they're doing better than the NRA, but the NRA now is synonymous with being a conservative American. And it used to not be that way from what I understand.
The prohibitionist movement made the same move of they were originally bipartisan and that's how they passed prohibition into law, but then they I think they tied themselves to the Democrats. I'm not sure, but they became kind of a one party partisan and it weakened massively their influence. Yeah, I would say another example of like the backlash becoming stronger is I don't know if you saw this, Ardot, but Chuck Schumer, who is Jewish and is also a Zionist and is the majority leader in the Senate, he just released a statement where he basically condemned the Israeli government and he also called for Netanyahu to step down and for there to be new elections. And I mean, Chuck Schumer is not a fucking progressive, and he is a hardline Zionist. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He is. I think he chairs the Jewish caucus in the Senate. So they are starting, and the New York Times, which is also very pro-Israel. I forget the name, but their top Jewish columnist, he wrote an op-ed where he basically was criticizing the Netanyahu government. And he ends the piece by saying he calls being pro-Israel in America on the Democratic side, he calls it politically radioactive. And you need New York columnists and you need Jewish senators to not think tying themselves to Netanyahu and the war as basically a suicide vest.
yeah.
That you can't survive as a movement if all of the politicians and journalists and media figures are afraid to affiliate with you.
Yeah, well, and I think too, this is a good, I think another push has been the fact that they are starting to wake up and realize that they might actually lose to Donald Trump. That their top guy, who has been abhorrent with how he's treated the issue, is. I think it's one thing if it's just kind of a one off, we might lose a couple senators. It's another thing that you might lose the presidency over this issue. You know what I mean? Um,
Especially if you lose the presidency to someone who doesn't believe in
Yeah,
democracy.
and somebody who has stated that he's going to, and I quote, finish the job. So I think, like it's a little too late, I think, like it's again,
Do you
like
think the pivot won't save the
the,
Democrats in the November elections?
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. We'll have to see. I mean, our the news, everything happens really fast. I mean, we've seen with October 7th and we've seen with the Israel Ukraine war that events can happen and they can completely alter and shift things in the span of a few months. And our attention spans are slow. The 24-hour news cycle has made it so that we are constantly being inundated with information. And so, public opinion shifts rapidly. So it might not be too late. But I mean, I think the fact that they didn't come to this realization 5 months ago or even a month and a half after October 7th, I think is pretty telling. But we've never really, you and I have never believed that the Democratic Party, at least since, 2 years ago, has been, they've not been strategically, strategically intelligent.
Hmm.
They have done everything wrong. The fact that the election is so close right now, the fact that the polling between Trump and Biden is where it is a failure on the Democratic Party and whoever is in charge of just broad strategy. But we've talked about this before.
Hmm. Well, I will say, I mean, the squad, we've made this critique before of the squad. Like, the progressives are, there is a zero sum game in some of their policy and the moderates. Like anti corruption, that's a zero sum game. Schiff, Pelosi, Schumer, they take hundreds of millions of dollars from dark money and lobbyists. Like, there is no compromise with Democratic leadership about anti corruption. Any sort of thing that involves helping poor people and involves raising taxes on those people's donors. Like they're in a civil war, and the game is a civil war inside the Democratic Party and ousting the moderates and taking power. But the progressives have historically like not understood this, and it's been very frustrating to both of us that we were watching, we're watching the moderates like sideline the progressives on important committees, not promote them into leadership, constantly attack them in the media, and literally over the past 5 months, like openly plot to just primary all of them, despite them not falling out of line. And I think this it's a good sign that for once they do seem to understand that it is a war and they are working together, the progressives against the moderates. And I think even more importantly, that they're taking that fight to the people, that it's not some backroom shenanigans. They're using the fact that we do represent the majority of Democrats and we do represent the future, and being proud of that and saying that with your chest. I mean, I think it would be different if we were monsters and the things we're trying to push were evil and wrong and in the minority, but like there's no reason to not be trumpeting from the tops of the buildings like we're the people serving the American people. Our opponents are literally being funded by foreign governments. We are for anti-corruption. We are for reform to the American voter decides policy. Our opponents are being funded by billionaires, and
Yeah.
I think it's a great step they're finally doing this.
Well, and I think again, like the benefit of that is that you manage to pick off, I think, members of, you manage to pick off conservatives. I mean, I think that from what I've seen, slightly based on polling and slightly based on anecdotes, there was you know, a, a section of even like moderate to more right wing Republicans who, not politicians, but constituents who they're pro Israel, but they don't give a shit about the Palestinian people. But they just don't want to be involved in foreign affairs. They're isolationist. The sort of isolationist string of conservatives, I think, is pretty hefty and pretty powerful. And I think that, at the most part, a vast, a large swath of even more independents, moderates, Republican moderates, like, they just don't want to be involved in they don't think America should play Superman and basically bail out countries like Israel that make really stupid fucking decisions um, with the way they choose to go about um, dealing with you know threats and you know issues.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so I think there's promising stuff there, and I think there's like I said, I mean it doesn't come from any sort of belief that the Palestinian people don't deserve to be, fucking carpet bombed, but hey, fucking it's electoralism, it's a vote. When you vote, you're voting for one person, you're not really voting um you're not putting, your policy suggestions next to your vote. You're just voting for a guy that's going to, do something.
Yeah, although I will say I am worried that this pivot by the progressives to work together in an open coalition and fight APOC openly, I am worried that this is too late. Like polling has indicated, like I think last time I saw like Cori Bush, she's like 20 points down, and I think I can't remember the others, but there are other progressive squad members who it's not looking good. Jamal Bowman, he and Latimer neck to neck. So, like, this is why having a fucking game plan as an ideology is important. Is like, if like 3 or 4 of your guys and you only have 30 of them, if 3 or 4 of your guys are going to get fucking eliminated in the November election, because you're too slow, well, then you're fucking useless. You're not going to be able to take power. Like, if, the bare minimum of winning is you have to have at least a majority. If you can't even hold the seats you have because you're not protecting each other and you're not like reacting effectively to changes, well, then how the fuck are you going to take a majority if you can't even hold your minority?
Yeah. Well, I think it's young, young, like what's the phrase? Young blood, kind of like, the progressives are still getting their feet wet, and I think that there's the progressive caucus and the progressives we have, they've only really been in power for since the beginning of the Trump administration. I think that's the difficulty of you know us having a progressive movement kind of surge forward at a time of incredible political instability. I think
Mhm.
if AOC had been elected 15 years ago, I think that they would have a game plan. But I think it's the unfortunate, you know, reality of being an amateur. I mean, I hate to say it. I'm not saying this in a way that's meant to be disrespectful or rude, but they are amateurs. You know what I mean? They're all amateurs. Like they've not, they
But
don't have.
we don't have 15 years
Oh
for
yeah,
them to
well
get their
that's what
shit
I'm
together.
saying. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like the, you know, um, the pressure is on, and it's just unfortunate that it's on at a time when we need the progressives to be more on their shit than ever before. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
If this were the Obama administration, I think they would have more room to play around and to kind of learn the ups and downs. But they got to learn the ups and downs, and then they got to fucking go. You know what I mean? They got to put together a game plan because um, you know they're going up against people who have been in office for 30, 40 years. Some of these more more powerful veteran Democrats, and um, I think reading about some of the more progressive senators from back in the day, there is a decorum, there is sort of a culture of Washington that does exist, where if you're a newcomer, you are not allowed, or you're not permitted to really be bold and be aggressive and be ideological when you first start out. There's sort of a hazing period that happens in Washington when you become a senator or a representative. And I think it can make it difficult to be a progressive, and you have to kind of go through that hazing period before you can actually get your feet wet. And I think that's like I said, if the hazing period had been under Barack Obama, I think we would be in a better spot. But unfortunately, like the hazing period occurred for all these different progressive politicians, at a time when we are facing the greatest threat to democracy, which is obviously Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And even instability in Israel and in Ukraine. It's just so they got to get their shit together. And like you said, hopefully it's not too late for that, but it looks like from the polling that it might be.
Yeah, I think the thing that they have to realize is like the reason there's hazing periods, the reason why freshmen are discouraged from really holding power, keeping their mouths, like this isn't unprecedented. I mean, in kind of early American history, you actually weren't supposed to give speeches as a freshman, uh, Republican or Democrat. You were supposed to, like, your entire first term, you were supposed to shut the fuck up. You were supposed to listen to your elders. And, like, the way those rules are designed to minimize the individual member and strengthen the power of leadership, that is a very deliberate power gaining strategy. That is
Yeah,
a way for leadership to maintain power. That is a way for leadership to ensure that freshmen and radical Democrats and Republicans don't work together and build coalitions and overthrow leadership. And the reason they're doing that is because leadership's positions are fundamentally unpopular and they're killing America.
yeah,
And the Republicans, I will say to their credit, do understand that. Like they understood that the decorum, the Tea Party understood this, MAGA understood this. They understood that leadership and a lot of the rules of decorum and the traditions are designed to prop up leadership, and that it does not in any way benefit you if you're a radical Republican to listen to them. And I think that's why they're in a much better position. That like they have killed a couple Republican speakers, and leadership is afraid of them.
yeah.
And that's a huge
Imagine
reason
if,
why they control the Overton window way better than we do.
yeah, imagine if they had taken out Pelosi. I mean, that would have been unbelievable. Imagine if the progressives, which I think they have more of a majority than the radical Republicans. There are more
Hmm.
progressives in office than there are Matt Gaetzes and Marjorie Taylor Greenes. The radical Republicans um, only make up maybe like 7 or 8 members of Congress, but there's like 30 progressives that have been elected in Congress. Imagine if they had pulled a Matt Gaetz. Not saying that would have been considering depending on the circumstances. I'm not saying that could have been good or bad, but like just imagine if they had pooled their power together and just done something like that. Um, or managed to strategically remove uh, an individual who has been one of the biggest obstacles to progressivism in the United States, Nancy Pelosi. That would have been hugely beneficial, and but um, everything Fowler just said, I think is you know explains why that didn't happen.
Hmm.
Um, so do you want to move on to the second topic because we're at 26 minutes, so we can
Yeah, let's do
yeah.
that. If you don't have anything more you want to say.
Yeah, not really. Second topic, I'm gonna let Fowler open this up and kind of go over what happened with this.
So, um, because Feinstein died, Dianne Feinstein in California. She was a senator. She died.
Old as hell.
I don't have a lot of positive things to say about Dianne
I don't
Feinstein.
think anybody
She
does.
was she was a conservative moderate, and Dianne Feinstein's kind of role in politics was occupying a seat she used to not help anyone besides herself. And basically, anytime anyone in the Democratic Party attempted to do anything of worth, climate change comes to mind. Her basically telling them to shut up and shuffle back to the back seat of the line, and that she'd been doing this a long time, and the real maneuver is just to fucking do nothing. So she has died, and
Yeah,
um, there was a three-way or four-way race. I forget the name of the Republican, but the Democrats was Katie Porter, who's a progressive, but one of the more conservative progressives. Barbara Lee, progressive, a lot more radical, a lot longer career than Katie Porter. Katie Porter, I think, came to power like 2018, 2020. She's sort of newer. Barbara Lee, kind of an OG, ex Black Panther, against the Iraq War, against the Patriot Act, like a lot of sort of a way longer career, and definitely more radical than Katie Porter, but definitely also more optically difficult. I mean, she's a literal Black Panther. Um, and then Adam Schiff, who's kind of like he kind of came to power as like a key resist lib, sort of impeached Donald Trump, um, but economically conservative and anti-corruption reform. And um, the race didn't go super well. Adam Schiff won. He would have won anyway, but he certainly would have won less easily if Katie Porter and Barbara Lee had gotten their shit together and had one of them endorse the other, so the progressive ticket wasn't split. But that's a conversation for another day. Um, but after their loss, Katie Porter essentially, I don't know if you have the statement pulled up or not, because I haven't looked at it in a couple days, and I think you just looked at it. But she essentially made a statement in which she said that she lost the race because of big money donors and sort of dark money subverting the election. And Adam Schiff has sort of responded to this through kind of his blue MAGA rhetoric, where he has compared Katie Porter's comments to sort of the Republican authoritarianism, the election denial, the overt fascism, and he and other sort of moderates have been using this comparison to accuse Democrats who do point out how dark money just runs all of our elections and the influence of billionaires and millionaires on sort of policy as just like the same thing as like the MAGA authoritarianism. I think this is kind of a very complicated issue. I have a lot of different thoughts, some of which contradict each other, but that is kind of my understanding of it. I don't know if you would agree with that summation or not.
Yeah, so, before we started the episode, one of the things that I said to Fowler was, I basically made the statement that, like, there's a very big difference between implying that an election is rigged by some sort of higher power and, doing what the Republican Party has done, which is not pointing to the higher power. They just say the election is rigged. A lot of times, what they mean is they mean it was rigged by the Jews, because the idea of a shadowy cabal controlling politics is the oldest anti Semitic trope there possibly is. And there's a reason why, when the Republican Party invokes the idea of the election being rigged or stolen, or with the democratic process being, subverted in some way, they never actually tell you, who who they mean when they say that. Or they try to say, George Soros, George Soros. George Soros is Jewish. There's a reason they point to him. And they don't point to, Bernie Mac, the founder of Home Depot, or the 10 billion other, non-Jewish billionaires who influence politics.
We
Um,
should also say that the Republicans take more dark money than the Democrats. Like
yeah,
even if you played that stupid game, like it's not like the Republican Party. They have been against any form of anti-corruption reform really since like Nixon.
yeah, absolutely. And so, there's a difference between, doing that dance and then pointing out reality. Pointing out, I think, again, we just talked about APAC, and I know it's hard because, we're in a really weird position where, unfortunately, the dark money donors who have exerted incredible influence is a Israeli interest group, which is why I said at the beginning of the podcast, it's very important when you do. Um, it's very important that you specify the non monolithic opinions of, like, Jewish people. The fact that APAC is an organization whose entire goal is to further the interest of Israel, and Israel is a administrative state. In the same way that when you talk about the United States, um, like when people critique America, like obviously they're not critiquing Americans. They're critiquing the American state. I mean, we had in 2020. I mean, we had a whole. This should be a simple concept, considering that since 2020 we've been aggressively, and everybody has been aggressively, critiquing the American administrative state. But we know that we mean the American administrative state, not like individual Americans. Um,
Mm.
Same thing with APAC. Like, but I think it's difficult because I think if you're not careful with how you frame things, you can venture into, um, like blue MAGA territory. But I think, like, it's particularly disgusting, that, like, it kind of goes back to what, we've talked about in previous podcasts, and what we talked about with John Fetterman last podcast about how, like, the reason why Adam Schiff and all these Democrats are invoking the blue MAGA stuff is because they are lying, you know? Like, Fowler said, Adam Schiff, I think you said that he takes more dark money than any candidate.
He and Pelosi, they
Yeah.
are the donors in California.
Yeah,
They are the
so
ones that, yeah.
I think it's important to note, like, when they say things like this, like, they're liars. You know what I mean? Like, they don't mean it. Um, they don't mean that they give a shit about, blue MAGA. They know that they're bought and paid for the most part. And they will do anything to, uh, portray an air of um, an air of, like, dignity and innocence towards the issue. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think there are two problematic parts of the blue MAGA rhetoric. One is kind of like Arda was saying, like it is a disingenuous attempt to stop real reform and to point out actual corruption in the Democratic Party that's causing the Democrats to not help working people. And it's a disingenuous way for Schiff and Pelosi and these other like deeply corrupt, deeply miserable figures to avoid that stuff. And that is problematic in of itself, because if you do not want the country to fall to authoritarianism, we do have to address poverty. We do have to address inequality. We do have to address all these things that they are stopping from occurring.
And if you
You know,
take note, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Fowler, but I just have to add to it, like, you know, like the APAC, the APAC story breaking and this happening at the same time, I think is a really good example of like, you know, understanding context. Like this is happening at the same. So Adam Schiff is basically stating that if you even imply that like he and many other Democrats are bought and paid for, that you're blue MAGA. He's saying this at the exact same time that for I think one of the first times in our lifetime, the American people, if you watch cable news, or if you just follow any news sources, you know, like APAC has been blatant and brazenly open about the fact that they are buying out politicians. You know what I mean? Like this
Mhm.
is happening at the same time that a dark money organization is going sicko mode and just flat out bribing politicians.
Dark Money, by the way, if we're talking about Adam Schiff is one of the most vocal pro-Israel, pro-war candidates. Adam Schiff is he is a hardline Zionist who has refused to condemn Israel, and should be talked about on that issue in the same way we talk about Fetterman,
Yeah.
because he has
Um,
been a fanatic on that side.
yeah, and so I think, like this is a fatal mistake, at least strategically, to try to do blue MAGA because if you're an average Democrat, let's say you're somebody that's really not, you follow politics like everything else, but if you're just like a Democratic voter, you're watching the news, you're following with, politics. What does it say that you're listening to Adam Schiff talk about how actually if you believe that politicians are bought and paid for, that uh, organizations and dark money controls elections, he's telling you as a voter, if you believe that, you're blue MAGA. But then at the same time, you're looking and watching news stories about APAC spending, at this point, I think it was $200 million to primary progressive candidates across the country. Like I don't know
Mhm.
if it really shows. I think the contempt for the constituency that Adam Schiff would say something like that. You know what I mean? Like he thinks you're stupid. If you're a Democrat watching, Adam Schiff believes that you're stupid. He thinks you're dumb. He thinks you're fundamentally unintelligent and um, that you can't see what's going on with your own two eyes. And I think,
Well, I think this will work for conservative and moderate Democrats, particularly conservative and moderate Democrats who do not perceive the rise of authoritarianism on the right as being kind of a desperation of the poverty and inequality in the country. Like if you don't, as Ardot and I perceive the rise of authoritarianism within its historical context as an act of desperation by working Americans against basically the hardness of life. If you perceive it as an inherently
yeah,
irrational thing, which I think moderates and conservative Democrats do believe, like they don't believe in real inequality. They don't really believe in real systemic reform. I think the blue MAGA stuff will be incredibly effective. But I think for Democrats who do understand what's happening, Democrats who are more liberal and more progressive, I mean, you are turning away all of the people in your party who the young people especially, who actually they are not happy about how things are, and they do actually want to be able to afford education and healthcare, and they would like to not be like priced out of their fucking
yeah, and
housing.
and to be, I think the thing is too. One of the things about the Democratic Party that is so, I think, like why aren't we getting young voters? Because you don't dream anymore. You know what I mean? They don't dream anymore. They're a bunch of old geriatrics who are at the end of their lifespan and who think that the end of history has come. You know what I mean? They don't believe in anything getting better. They don't believe in fundamentally anything improving. And I think, it makes sense as to why Make America Great Again has made a lot of people, has really resonated with people. I hate to say it, but like you can talk about, what does that really mean? What does Make America Great Again mean? Um, but like, you know, we went to the moon. I don't think if there was, I don't believe if the space race were happening today, the Democratic Party um, would effectively beat the Soviet Union at the space race. I don't think they have the motivation. I don't think they have um, I don't think the broad Democratic establishment has the motivation to think of uh, to think about improving life in any way, shape, or form. Even if that is, even if, or, reaching for a goal, even if that goal is like a space race. Um, and I think that's what a lot of young people want too, and a lot of Americans want, along with economic prosperity. And economic prosperity obviously will, you know, make that a reality. But um, I
Well,
think it
this is
even
the
goes
problem with
beyond fixing
corruption
things.
is
I think
that
it's just that
we
they are they don't believe in anything. They don't believe in anything. They don't believe in even improving, or reaching for a goal that is, seemingly nonsensical but pays off later on.
well, I think this is the problem of corruption is that like corruption changes your incentives. Like becoming a stronger country, achieving the space race, like expanding American democracy, like these things become less and less important with corruption because you're motivated by all these other factors. And the way that you hold power, the more corrupt you are, the less efficient you govern society. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like I think this is the inevitable byproduct of allowing like all this like foreign power and sort of like dark money interest to control the party. Of course you're not going to want to do the space race if like that's not the thing motivating you,
yeah,
and there are other things driving your apparatus. I will also say the other thing that really frustrates me of the blue MAGA discourse is Adam Schiff came to power really being one of the most vocal people against the Trump administration. He was an early advocate of basically calling them authoritarians openly. And, that is what the Democrats ran on in 2020 and 2022, that like the Republicans are authoritarians. And I agree with this rhetoric. And I also agree with this sentiment. And that like you have to vote Democrat and you have to strengthen the Democratic Party in order to fight off authoritarianism. But this blue MAGA stuff is it's against a lot of that rhetoric because you're not actually appreciating how dangerous the rising fascism is. You're conflating to keep your own political power reformists with fascists. And that's not only is that insulting to your voters and insulting to reformists, you're massively downplaying, a bunch of people who are just openly wanting to end democracy. I mean, there is a story maybe 2 years ago now where Matt Gaetz was saying, like, if the red wave happens and the Republicans take control of the House, like what they should do is like the way McCarthy did in the Un-American Committee in the 50s is they should create bullshit committees and investigations and trials, and they should use it to arrest as many Democratic legislatures as possible. And by tying like Democratic voters and politicians who want to like look at dark money to a person like Matt Gaetz, I mean you're allowing these fucking monsters to take power, and you're weakening the argument of like these people are actually an existential threat by comparing them to people that are not at all fucking comparable.
yeah, absolutely. And this is all happening, by the way, at the same time that Donald Trump has said that the migrants coming over the border are not humans, and that if he loses the election, it's going to be a bloodbath. Um, Obviously, after he made that statement, the guy who's responsible for correcting everything he says had to come out and be like, well, he doesn't mean a bloodbath as in we're going to kill people. He means a bloodbath as in the migrants are going to start killing people or something like that. But, like we all know what he means when he says it's going to be a bloodbath if he loses. Uh, you know, um, if Trump wanted that clarification, Trump could have come out and said that himself, but he didn't. So, I think it's hugely irresponsible for Schiff to make those statements. But it's, I mean, like Fowler said, um, it might very well just be that for many Democrats like Schiff, they've been bought out to the point that they don't actually really give a fuck about democracy to begin with. Adam Schiff's interests are not with might not be anymore protecting um, American democracy. It could be protecting the interest of Israel and the Israeli state. So that's where his loyalties seem to lie. And I don't know what you do with that, but you
Well,
know,
he clearly, for all of his talk about like understanding the rising authoritarianism and how problematic it is, he he clearly doesn't know history, and he clearly hasn't been listening to Gates and Bannon and Trump. If he thinks as a top Democrat, if they win, he will be unscathed. That they will let him just stay in the nice part of California with his millions. Like he has no idea what the fuck he's doing if he thinks that that is how that story is going to end.
yeah. Well, so I mean, yeah, I think I think it is what it is in that regard, and if they want to play that game, then they can play that fucking game. I will feel no sympathy for any of them. If they do get McCarthy, to be honest with you, I will just laugh and find it very amusing and funny. As will many Democrats, I'm sure. Like there's a lot of polling to indicate that both young people and Black Americans are shifting to the right, and it seems to not be taken with any sort of seriousness by the broad, Democratic establishment. If African Americans shift to the right, like the Democratic Party will lose the South. Like they will lose. They've already lost the South, but like a huge reason
They'll
why.
lose parts of the North
Yeah,
too.
they'll lose parts
I
of the North as
mean,
well.
the Democratic Party can't survive without the black vote. They need it. It's like it's the black vote and the women vote are the two minority coalitions that like the Democrats need to have any sort of majority.
Yeah,
If they
so
lose both of those groups, they're finished.
yeah, and I mean, but hey, as long as APAC gets more money, right? As long as Palestinian kids get carpet bombed more, right? Totally, totally chill. Um, totally what, that's the priority now, obviously. Um, yeah. Anyway, we're at 45 minutes. If I talk longer, I'll say something I'll get in trouble for, but I have more thoughts, but they're not nice thoughts. So I'm gonna choose peace. I'm gonna take the godly path and choose peace and not war. But you have anything else to close out with, Fowler?
I was just gonna say, Ardot, you can reevaluate, and in 5 months you can create a coalition when you're down 20 points.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see. We'll keep up to date on the blue MAGA rhetoric, and we'll basically have to see whether it catches fire. I'm hoping Shift was just being particularly stupid, but I
It's a
do
lot of
not have
that
any
going
faith
around.
in.
A lot of
Yeah.
that going around recently. I mean, to the point that I'm like, I think the microplastics are actually starting to migrate into our brains and fucking cause some damage. Um, 'Cause that is microplastic behavior. The Democratic Party has been behaving in ways that make me think that they're inhaling like tire fumes and like I don't know microplastic behavior. I'm telling you, uh, eating credit cards every day.
We don't know what those Democratic leadership meetings involve. Perhaps that's all they do is they huff glue and they eat
Yeah,
microplastics.
hell yeah, brother. Let's do it. Roll Tide. Anyway, we're fucking done. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we'll see y'all in the next video.